Few people ever have the opportunity to sit in the presence of an American icon, so to say that I'm excited is probably the understatement of the century. This year's Theodore Roosevelt Award winner is Senator John Glenn. And Senator, I have to say you've accomplished quite a few things in your life, but I'm not sure too many people know about your athletic prowess. Can you tell me about your college experience at Muskingum?
Oh, I don't know that I had that much athletic prowess. I was not an All-American or anything like that. I did play, and I think there are a lot of lessons you get out of playing. I played in high school in football and basketball both, and in college. And I was not a great star, but I played, and I think there are a lot of things you learn from that.
What types of things? How did that experience help you as you went up the ranks?
Well, I think as the coaches of the NCAA know, they try and encourage people to excellence in whatever they do, in rising to their potential, whatever it is. And I think out of that then comes the second thing, where you combine whatever the individual's talents are into a team, and your talents blend with everyone else on the team. And those are things that I think have a wider audience, really, or should have a wider audience than just the athletics that we're talking about here. Our whole country sort of built on that, on some people rising to the occasion, whatever it is. And we don't do things alone in this country. We do them as part of a team. And I think we need to get back to some of that. Perhaps we have too much dichotomy now, too much opposition feeling here across our country in many different areas. So I look back to athletics as being something sort of the antipathy of that, sort of where you try and do your very best yourself. You combine those efforts with other people, and now that comes to teams and that accomplish things. So I think that there are a lot of lessons to athletics that go well beyond just the stadiums or the athletic fields.
Well, it's an interesting corollary, because you talk about teamwork. It seems like that as a public servant, as a senator of Ohio, that the ultimate in teamwork, isn't it?
It is. I believe you're representing a lot of people there, and to get anything done, you're working with other people once you get to the Senate or the Congress. And so there's some similarities there, I think, that we should note in that area too. But I think the main thing, though, that happens in athletics and that the NCAA sponsors is trying to have each person. It isn't just they don't have programs that are just solely devoted to teams. They have programs also that encourage every student to participate, to be active athletically, to be active physically. And that's good. We need more of that. I guess I'm becoming more aware of that the older I get, because some of those same lessons apply, I think, the older you get. And where you sometimes are becoming less able to run and jump and do the things we did once athletically. But the desire to participate and to keep yourself in some sort of fitness so that you're at your maximum, even though you're old, is something that carries over from those younger days in athletics, I believe.
In athletics, we talk a lot about leadership. And so how does the leadership that you experienced while a student athlete translate to what was a storied career in the armed services?
Yeah. You know, I've always looked at that as you have leadership, but along with you don't have leaders without a lot of followers. People willing to say, okay, I put my faith in a certain person and they're going to call a certain play, and we're all going to work together to make that work. And so I think you learn both ends of this in athletics. You have leaders in athletics who are the team captains, or I guess you look back at leadership of the coaches to begin with. But you have team captains, and you have those who lead different parts of the athletic program. And then you have the other people who also are in there doing their very best to carry out those things too. And that's what makes a team. That's what makes it work.
Let's talk about fear for a second, because when I think about flying, I used to have a terrible fear of flying, and you don't apparently, and about going to space and all of the incredible things that you've done. Are you not scared of anything?
Oh yeah, sure. And I think you get, I think in space, or it's a little like going into combat. You know, it's for a good purpose, and so you just hunker down and do it, and that's it. And you make up your mind that that's what you're going to do, and that's your job, and whatever comes about, why you're going to do it. People used to ask the astronauts a lot of times, were you afraid? And we had sort of a standard answer to that. We said, how do you think you'd feel getting ready for launch if you knew you were on top of 2 million parts built by the lowest bidder on a government contract. Now that sort of makes light of the whole thing, but you've trained very hard. I think that the best thing to mitigate or to reduce fear is to know the most you can possibly know, and that applied about the particular thing you're involved with. And that happened in the space program. We trained and trained and trained. We looked forward to those missions and looked forward to going up there. You trained a long time for that. You're proud to be representing your country in going up. And back in the days when we started this, back in Project Mercury, I made the first orbital flight in '62. At that time, we were in the depths of the Cold War. And the Soviets at that time were taking a lot of students to the Soviet Union, giving them their education, sending them back to third world countries, and claiming a technical and research superiority to the United States. Now, we didn't believe that was the case, but they were making hay with this all over the world. There were books, there were articles being written about, would communism be the wave of the future for the world? And so we looked at this at that time almost as a combat mission, as though you were setting out to prove that was not so. And we did that. And a big difference back in those days was when President Eisenhower decided that we would make our program completely open for the rest of the world to share and not clam up and make it a secret program like the Soviets had done. And I think that was a very important thing because the rest of the world then participated in those early flights and knew all about them and were very, they liked what they saw and backed what we were doing. So I think there's a lot to be said now that we've gone over from being just in a confrontation with the Soviet Union. We've gone over to where the basic purpose now is basic fundamental research. And the second flight I made then in 1998, the whole program had changed from one of proving we could do this and finding out what the problems would be, which we were after on the first flights, over to doing basic fundamental research. And on the flight that I was on in 1998, we had 83 different research projects on that one flight. In Columbia, not too long after that, when it burned up, they had 90 research projects on that one flight. So the purpose of the whole program has shifted.
When kids are in kindergarten and first grade, one of the most popular answers to the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, is I'm going to be an astronaut, which is probably a great answer. We know not everybody fulfills those early prophecies. When did you first know that you wanted to be an astronaut?
Well, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as astronaut. The word hadn't been invented yet, as far as I know. And astronaut or cosmonaut, as the Soviets put it. But as things developed, and this came along much later then, space flight was something that was just Buck Rogers type novel writing when I was growing up. But nobody ever thought that would seriously take place, and lo and behold, it took place in our time. So it was something that I was very fortunate my whole life in being at sort of around at the right time in the right place and have some opportunities that I'm very thankful for.
Why did you decide after your first flight to go into the Senate, to go into government?
Well, it was partly my decision and not all my decision. I wanted to go back up on another space flight. Excuse me. I wanted to go back up on another space flight, and Bob Gilruth, who ran the program at that time, he was the director of it, he said he wanted me to get into some areas of training, of management, of training. And I didn't much want to do that, and so I kept wanting to go back on the flight status again and be put in line for another flight. And he kept telling me, well, headquarters doesn't quite want you to do that yet. And so this went on for about a year and a half, and I couldn't get rescheduled again, and he was suggesting I do some of these other things. And I didn't know, I knew I had done a good job on the first flight, so it wasn't that. But it wasn't until some years later, and after about a year and a half, I decided then I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing just being there without flying again. And so I decided to leave NASA, which I did, went into business for a while, then into politics. But I found out later in a biography that was written, I think it was by, Reeves' book biography on President Kennedy, it turned out that he had told NASA that he would just as soon I wasn't used again for a while. And so that was being reflected downhill. I didn't know this at the time.
Any idea why?
And well, I guess he was, if something happened to me on a flight, well, he didn't want whether the political fallout or what it would be. But he was the one who had suggested to NASA that I not be used again for. I didn't know that at the time. And so it wasn't until many years later I found this out. By that time I'd gone on to other things and was in the Senate. But I'll always be glad for that start anyway.
Why did you decide to go back up in the 90s?
Well, I always wanted to go back. I said I wanted to go back on flight status. Well, it took 36 years to get back on flight status. But it was another thing, too. NASA has noted some 52 changes in the human body that occur in space. And there are about 8 or 9 of those are similar to just the aging process here on Earth. Your body's immune system. You become, in space, you become less, after you've been up several days, your body starts being less resistant to disease and infection. And the same thing happens on Earth here as you get older. The body's protein turnover, PTO they call it, protein turnover or protein replacement in the muscles, becomes more difficult in space and here on Earth for the elderly. There are other things like that. And I had suggested to some of the NASA doctors that it might be a good idea to send somebody up there that was getting older and see what we could learn about these things by comparing the younger astronauts and an older astronaut. The younger astronauts, when they come back from space, recover from these things completely in about usually a couple of weeks, maybe a little longer than that if they've been on a longer flight. But that's what I wanted to do, was go up and see if we couldn't compare some of my body reactions at 77, which is the age I was when I went up the last time, and compare that with the younger people and see if we couldn't maybe find out within the human body what triggers these systems on and off. If we could do that, we could not only have astronauts, younger astronauts, staying in space longer without having harmful effects, or we might be able also to cut out some of the frailties of old age right here on Earth. And that was exciting, and so I had all sorts of tests were run on me, and about a dozen blood samples taken during flight, and it for about 4 days during the flight had a series of tests run in which they were measuring 21 different body parameters at one time. Had a head net to monitor brain signals and heart and all the body functions. And those were analyzed completely, and so it doesn't mean, what I hoped would happen was that I would be the first of several, because people in that age bracket go into space, because just a sample of one doesn't mean that much scientifically to the doctors. But if you had a sample, say, of 5 or 6 or 10 people who had been in that same age bracket who had gone up, and you find out what their combined reactions are, and combine that with the younger people, then it seems to me that's where we start having a chance of really knowing what some of these parameters are that might change our whole aspect of aging here on Earth.
Well, you said that the younger astronauts, it takes 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer for them to recover after a flight. Yeah. How long did it take you to recover that
second? It took me about the same time.
So it didn't change much?
The only thing they measured on me that went out longer than the average, they were concerned there might be some lingering effect on osteoporosis. That's another thing that sets off in space. And so they did MRI checks on me out to about the 6-month period after we got back. And I didn't have any effect from that, so it was okay. But I'd like to see more samples so that we know a little bit more about this.
I may never have the opportunity to ask someone again, what does space feel like?
Well, it's very comfortable, actually, once you get up there and get adjusted to it. There are a few people, and once you are under the G load of getting up there, which isn't very great in the modern day flights, much heavier back in the Mercury days, when in the early days of the space program, you got up to about 8 Gs, but your Gs are in this direction, as though you're lying in bed and being accelerated straight up. That's the way it. And you got up to about 8 times gravity, but the Gs were in this direction. Now the G forces are down. Your maximum you have on launch is about 3 Gs, and on re-entry 2 Gs. And that's quite tolerable, but you have a longer period then from launch pad into orbit, because your acceleration is not as rapid. You still have to get up to about almost 5 miles a second in orbital speed, about 17,500 miles an hour.
That's fast.
So, and very fast, yeah. So, and that's what the reason why you lengthen this thing out. They lengthened the launch period out when they designed the shuttle so that you could take more scientific equipment up there to do experiments. So it's but how it feels, you have maybe after that G period, then you cut off and you have your 0G and things start floating around, and you float around along with it. And that transition, there are about maybe 20% of the astronauts have some vertigo or a little bit of nausea at that time until they can get adjusted over the first day or so. And it's but for most people now, that particularly if you've been up there before, you don't tend to have that. It's something that you acclimate to, I guess.
For our student athletes who are watching, maybe to try and put it into terms that they can understand, you've been fortunate enough to wear 2 helmets, a football helmet and an astronaut suit helmet. Is there a similarity or a difference in how they feel on top of your head?
No similarity at all. And think of, I suppose just that it's tight fitting and you feel closed in, but you don't have that in a football helmet. But you, with the flight helmet, and you have your microphones built in there, and a visor that lets up down that seals pressure inside the suit. Things like that are a little bit different, but there may be some similarity there, but I don't think you don't need to train with a football helmet to get into a space helmet. Let's put it that way.
Senator Glenn, I must ask, which sport were you better at, football or basketball?
Oh, I think basketball probably. I don't know. And my experience goes back a long, long time. And compared to for instance, in football, the T formation hadn't even been invented yet. It was all single wing, double wing, for those who are old enough to even remember that or to have heard about it someplace. I find even some of the coaches these days don't know too much about single wing and double wing football. And I played center. And when you're playing center with that kind of football, you don't sit there and look at the guard opposite you when you throw the ball to the quarterback. You have to be looking back through your legs, because when you come to the signal to go, like 1, 2, 3, whatever, if you're going on the count of 3, the backs are already underway. They're running on the play, and so the center had to lead them about 3 or 4 feet as they took off back there. So you couldn't be looking any other direction. So it meant that on every play, the opposite guard hit you in the back of the head probably as far as they could. So that was not the best position to be playing. But those were days of when the football hadn't changed yet to a single wing, double wing. And in high school days back then, in fact, you played both ways. We didn't have platoon system. You didn't have offensive team and defensive team. You played a position, and that's it. If you're on offense or defense, you still played that position. So it was a very different game back then, and that wasn't even comparable to the intricacies of what we have now in these days. But I enjoyed athletics, and it was great. And I think some of the things I mentioned early on about the coaches wanting you to excel and keeping yourself in physical shape and things like that, I think some of those things, those carry right on through. And those are not something that you just put down when you stop athletics in high school or college. They're things that the way that you do things, your attitude toward trying to achieve, toward trying to do things in a new or different way, those are things that go on. And I think those go on all your life, I think, for most people that were involved in athletics. And I think they have for me. I think those were good lessons. And those occur whether you're a big star or whether you're just one of the squad. I think you can still develop those attitudes that do you good all your whole life. And I find myself now as I get older, find myself going back to some of those same things to keep in shape and exercises and things like a lot of people get out of yoga and stuff now that you learned back then on stretching and so on. Those are very real things that do you good in old age as well as young age back when you were a student athlete.
You're from Ohio, and you have a relatively decent athletics program in Columbus.
I'd say.
Are you still an avid college sports fan?
Oh yeah, very much so. Go to as many games as I can. And Jim Tressel, who's been coaching there, of course, done such a great job there at Ohio State, and superb teams, and his record's been outstanding, and so we're all very proud of that there, of course. Muskingum College is where I went to school in New Concord, Ohio, which is about 70 miles east of Columbus, and it's a great school. It's always had good athletic program and good academic programs there too, so we're very proud of that. I'm still on the board of trustees there, so I get down there and see the people at Muskingum pretty often too.
Senator Glenn, as we wrap here, do you have any messages for today's student athletes?
No, I just think, enjoy it, do the best you can, do the things that your coaches are encouraging you to do. And to other students too, it's not just limited to the athletes who are there on a scholarship program. Most of the programs are things that encourage the whole student body, everybody, to exercise, be involved in some sport, be a participant. And I think that's important. That's an important part of the whole program to me. Every school, every year, is not going to be a championship, have a championship team and everything. But you'll have a lot of individual sports where people can try out for those, and people wind up sometimes in their, even if they're not on an organized competitive basis, they wind up competing with themselves. How much can they run without feeling a certain way, or how much can they exercise? That's a very healthy thing to do, and that's something that'll last them all their lives.
Thank you, Senator Glenn.
Thank
Congratulations
you.
on the award.
Thank you. Appreciate that.